Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Daniel. I'm a product designer at Wix, and today I'm going to share with you a new and exciting feature called CSS editing. So what we'll do today is, first of all, we'll cover an introduction to CSS. We'll align everyone on what CSS is. Then we'll talk about the CSS solution inside Wix Studio and how it works with all the rest of the environment. And then we'll do a hands-on demo of working with CSS in the editor, and we'll see exactly how to turn it on, how to enable it, how to apply classes, and the whole thing. And we'll do a small Q&A session at the end. Okay. So first of all, a small introduction to CSS. Basically, today, a website is composed of three main things. First of all, we have the HTML file, which contains all the content of the site. That means text, images, the elements themselves, buttons, everything is inside the HTML file. Then you have the CSS file, which is the file that has all the code that reference the elements of the HTML and explain to the browser how he wants it to be displayed. So in there, you will find which fonts to use, which colors to use, what size the element should be, what the layout should be, and everything is in the CSS file. And we also have a JavaScript file, which contains all the interactive elements, what you want the site would be to behave like, if you want some functions to run, if you want anything to be clickable or interactive with the user. So that's the JavaScript file. So you can see here an example for a website that has no CSS on the left. So basically what you're seeing is just a list of all the elements inside the website. You can see here images, links, text, all the raw content without any design. And on the right, you can see the same in the exact website, the exact HTML file, but with a CSS file attached to it. And then you can see that everything falls into place. Everything gets its color, its own font. You can set the layout and everything looks designed and how it should be. This is another great example of the same HTML file that has no CSS and then different style sheets of CSS applied to it. And you can see that the site looks completely different with each of those style sheets. So the fonts look different, the colors, the layout of the page changes completely, things move from left to right. So the CSS really defines how the website would look to the end user. So let's talk about a bit how CSS code looks like and how it works. So generally speaking, you have a selector, which is this section, which it's sort of like a tag that says to the HTML what element in the HTML you want to refer to. And that means that if you have a list of elements and you want to have a certain design property attached to an element, you will use this selector to tell the browser which element to tackle. So for example, if I have a dropdown on my website and I want to tackle it and change its border, for example, I will use a property called border and I'll use a value that explains exactly what I want it to be. For example, a 2-pixel width, a dashed line, a certain color, and this will apply on the browser, and you will see the design apply. So this list of properties is really long, and it really applies for everything that you know from design, starting from text styling, dimensions, borders, backgrounds, and all of those properties are controlled by values such as units and saved words. You can use block, right, left, words that tells the browser what value to use. You have a list of colors, all the colors that we know, RGB, hex colors, whatever you want. And those are the properties and values that define how website looks. So for those of you who are already using Wix, you're probably noticing that some of the properties you see here that currently not exist at Wix. For example, like a filter, a transform, z-index, things that are used on the web, on websites you can find when you look for inspiration, for example, but currently not available at Wix. So it could be like animations, the complex animations. and invert filters on top of elements, and gradients for text. And these are all things that we see in modern websites and currently not available at Wix. So that's why we enabled the CSS editing in Wix Studio. And now I'll show you an example of a website that uses those properties, and we'll see what we can do now with the CSS editing feature. Okay, so first of all, we have here a real text inside a Wix Studio website that has 3 elements of properties, CSS properties applied to it. So you can see we have blur effect on the letters. We have gradient, which not something that's available up until now. You can see that I'm hovering on the text and it's moving. So that's right from the top 3 properties that were not existing up until now, and you can now use. This blur filter, which is really nice and really common on the web, you can now use it on every element in Wix. So that means not only images and text, it can also be applied to videos and any component at Wix. So it could be a really powerful tool. We have CSS marquee now, so you don't have to do marquee using HTML or any animations or something complex. You could now copy paste a CSS marquee from the web and use it inside Wix. All of the mixed blend mode that you know from Photoshop or Figma or any design program, you can now use inside the editor and inside the website. So you can see here that that's real text with different mixed blend modes applied to them, and you will be able to combine different blend modes with different images or shapes or SVGs or whatever you want inside the editor, and change how things look and get really cool effects, which are rendered on the fly. So you can see that things are moving in and it applies to them. You can also use these filters to change images that you display on the website. So if you have, for example, an image that you want to have a grayscale version of, you don't need to have 2 images like you need up until now and hide them or show them or something like that. You can just change its color values using a filter, grayscale filter, sepia filter, change its hue, rotation, and whatever you want. There's a lot more. And this is done on the fly, in this case on hover, and you don't need a couple of images to handle that. So that's really cool. Another really common filter that we have is invert. So now you can take entire sections in Wix Studio and invert them, just flip the colors. So you can see this is real text and a real image, and you can just change between the elements, how they look. And you can do it with a click of a button. This is an example for a relatively new filter called the backdrop filter. So this is a container which we apply the backdrop filter to. And backdrop filter, what it does is it takes whatever behind it and it changes how it looks. So in this case, it gives it a blur effect. And we also added a gradient effect, so it would look like a glass. And this will be applied to anything that you have underneath it. So text, images, videos, whatever you want. And this is a really cool effect. And of course, it doesn't have to move. It can also be still. The same thing will happen with other backdrop filters like invert. So you can see here that this text is real. And the image of the SVG of the circle goes on top of it and just changes it and flips it and invert it. And also does the same thing on images. So it's a really powerful tool. And another cool effect is the z-index effect, which you can now change the z-index of elements inside the page after it's rendered. So if I have a list of layers and I have things that are on top of each other, I can, for example, take the hover effect and make the user pop elements to the top of the page, and also text boxes and whatever you want. So this is a really cool interactive behavior that you can now use to change how things looks. Okay, so let's get back to our presentation. So this was just a glimpse of what you can do using CSS. And now let's talk a bit about how CSS editing inside the Wix Studio works and the Wix Studio environment. So the CSS editing feature allows you to add your own CSS code to style elements and their individual parts. That means that of course, you already have the design panel inside Wix Studio, which you can control elements in, for example, this button. So we have all the design features that we currently have, whatever properties we allow. But on top of that, we now allow you to add CSS code to each of the elements, specific structure elements. So, for example, if we have a button, we at Wix define semantic classes for each of the elements on the button. For example, a button has the outer frame, the label, and the icon, and each component that we have in Wix Studio is defined differently, and we added a global classes for it. So now you can add CSS code to each of those and really control how the button looks. So why not just do it using the regular styling panels, like stylable panel? So the advantages is, first of all, you can do a new kind of global design with websites. That means that you can take a bunch of elements that are not the same element even, and apply, for example, a shadow to all of them, the specific exact shadow, or a color to them, or whatever CSS property that all of them can support. And you can control all of this using a single line of code. We will see it in the hands-on demo. And of course, you can use new properties that are not available up until now, like filters and blend modes. And you can use animations, which are more complex, and CSS-based animations. And you can copy them from the web. We'll see that in a minute also. You can do media queries, so you can control the same element on different sizes of screens. And all of this also contributes to better performance, because you can change a lot of the things you are now doing using Velo and JavaScript, and do it using CSS. And that means that your site will have better performance, because the least JavaScript you have on your website, the better performance it has. Okay, so we'll get now to the hands-on demo. First of all, we'll see how we enable CSS on Wix Studio. And then we'll work with elements with the semantic classes, the global classes, and also custom classes. And we'll see also how to use Velo with CSS. And let's see how it works. Okay, so first of all, how to enable CSS. I have Wix Studio, a new website just opened. First of all, I'll go to code in here, and I click on start coding. So the CSS works inside the Velo environment. So I'm enabling the Velo code features for the entire website. And then I will have also an option to see and tackle the CSS. Okay, so we can see here the page code. This is a regular Velo code that we already know. And we also have a new tab in here that's called the CSS. And if I click it, you'll see that we have a specific editor for global CSS. This is a CSS file which controls the entire website. CSS that's written here will affect every element on the website according to the classes that you will use. We'll see it in a minute. But everything will be stored inside this CSS file. So let's, for a second, add something to the stage. For example, maybe a button. And I'll open again the code panel. So you can see that when I click on when I choose a component, I have a new tab in here inside the CSS tab. It's called CSS classes, which is really similar to the properties tab. What you can find here is, first of all, a CSS reference link. If I click in here, I will go to the reference or CSS for this specific element for the button. And I will be able to see all the classes that we defined and how can I manipulate this element using CSS. In here, we can see the global button classes. These are the classes that we defined at Wix for you to use. And you can choose one of those and then apply CSS for them. So I'll just get rid of this demo code. And if I, for example, click in here, I will have the structure of selector, which we already saw on the presentation, and a place to write properties and values for the buttons. And those global classes will affect all the buttons on the website, no matter what page they are in. So this is a way to control an entire elements or entire section of elements on the entire website. We also have a section here called custom classes. In custom classes, you can define your own classes. And this is the intention of this is to enable you to change specific elements on the website and not the entire website. So for example, if I have a couple of buttons and I want to change only a specific button or only a group of buttons, I can use the custom classes to define that. So let's see on a demo website how everything works. So we have here just 3 buttons that I already pre-made. These I just designed on the regular stylable panel using Wix without any CSS. And let's say I want to now change all the colors of the buttons on the website. For example, I have a client that says to me, I wonder how this website would look if all the buttons would be green. So instead of going one by one and change them, I can go and use one of the global button classes. So I have here a global class, and I'll enable the code that I already wrote. So this is the property that I chose, a background color, and I chose a value of medium sea green, which is a shade of green. And you can see that once I enabled it, all the buttons are changing to this color, and I can change whatever I want and use any property I want. So this is the example to control a group of the entire element on the entire website. So I'll disable it for a second. We'll go back to the regular state of the buttons. And you can also see that the design that I already made for the buttons using the regular style panel is saved. It's not erased or something. I'm just adding to it. And because of how CSS works, every property that I add as a CSS property will override the old property that we already have. So if all the buttons have different, for example, background colors, the property that I'm adding will override it and change it. And if I'm disabling it, we will get back to the original definition. So I also have, other than the frame of the button, I can also control one of the inner sections of the button, for example, the button label. So if I enable this line of code, I will control all the labels inside all of the buttons. So now you can see that all of the buttons have another underline. So this is, again, a way to tackle a specific part of a component and inside the entire website. I'll disable it also. And so this is really nice, but sometimes I don't want to change all of the buttons at once. I want to change only, for example, the secondary buttons. I want to have a group of specific buttons I will use along my website and change them accordingly. So what I can do is to create a specific custom class. I called it secondary button, and I added a background color of light sky blue. You can see that nothing happens, and that's because this custom class is something that I invented. It's currently not applied to any element on the screen. So in order to enable it, I will need to choose one of the elements, for example, this button, and I'll go here to custom classes, and I can either write or choose the specific class that I already defined. This is a secondary button. And if I choose it, you can see that it immediately changes the color background. And this works as tags, so you can add custom classes, you can remove custom classes, you can have multiple custom classes. And this will apply to every component that can handle this property. So every component that has a background color property, which support a background color property, can change using this class. So this also can be applied for containers or SVGs or whatever. And also, I can easily remove this class by just clicking here, and the button will return to its original design. Okay, so this was an example for buttons. Now, let's see how we can take CSS code that we find on the web and use it inside Wix very easily. So let's say I want to add an animation for those buttons. Let's go to a website. Let's go to a website that's called Animate CSS, which is not a Wix website, just a general CSS animation website. You can find here a lot of animations that the developers on the website define. So let's say I like this rubber band animation. I can go to its GitHub library, also not a Wix library. You can click here, source, and can say bouncing entrance, bounce in, for example, and I can take this animation and I can copy it, and I can go back to my website, and I can just apply it here inside Wix. So I'm just going to click here, paste it. Now I have an animation that's called bounce in. In order to enable it, I would need to use first of all a hover effect, a pseudo class. That means that pseudo class is a class that it's a state of a component. In this case, the hover component. And once I hover on the component, the animation will trigger. I also need to add animation duration, which I see I already have. So let's see if it works. And first of all, I need to apply this bounce in effect on one of the buttons. So for example, this button, and right here, bounce here. And that should be enough for it to. Let's see. Okay. I need to add animation duration for it. I need to use the same name. Okay. So generally, this will work. You should just need to use the animation and one of the animations you can find on web. Let's say get to the second example. So we have also an option to add a specific shadow for components. So for example, we have here those containers that doesn't have any shadows. So let's say I want to have the same shadow for all of them and apply it and control everything from the same place. So in order to do that, first of all, I'll go to a website that's called okay. So I get to a website called getscan.com, and this website offers a couple of pre-made shadows that you can just copy and paste. So you have here all sorts of shadows. So let's say we want this shadow to appear. So we just click it and copy it, and then we'll get back to our website. So I'm just going to go here to a semantic class I already opened called shadow, and then paste this shadow that I want to use. And now I can go to elements that I want to apply this shadow to, and just click on shadow in here. And you can see the shadow is already applying to those elements. So whatever element I have on my page, and and again, it can support shadow, I can now control the entire all the set of elements that uses the shadow using this line of code. So you can see everything gets the same shadow, even elements that couldn't support those shadows like images. So again, a really powerful way to control a group of elements. Okay, let's say we have a section like that, and we want to use a gradient on this shape. So this shape is currently a container, which doesn't even support gradients. You can only use regular colors. And let's say we want to apply a gradient to it. So again, I can go to a website that has examples for gradients. So like a gradient generator, also another Wix website, and you can find gradients all over the web. So I can go here and just play with it. Let's say change the colors and just randomly choose something. It could be a very complex gradient, whatever you want. And let's say I like this gradient, and then I go to here to the CSS section, and it makes me a CSS code of this specific gradient, and I can copy it to my clipboard. And then I can go again to my website, and I'll add a semantic class called gradient, and I'll paste the gradient I just made on the website. And you can see that if I'm going to any element, like we saw earlier, and adding a class that's called gradient, the class that I've already made, it applies the gradient to the element and recolor it. And this can be applied to anything that can support a color. So it can be for text and for SVGs and whatever you want. And you can really easily create a complex gradient using this tool or any other tool on the web, and just copy paste it and change it. And of course, you can. The code here is writable, so you can just change it inside the editor as well. Okay, so the last example that we're going to see is how to use CSS and Velo together, because sometimes CSS alone is not enough, and we want to use Velo functions to enable and disable CSS. So, for example, I have here this section, which is called section 7. And I want to have, for my user, an experience when he click on this subscribe button, this box pops up, and everything on the background would be blurred. So we could be really focused on writing his name and his email, and then subscribe again. So in order to do that, I need to do two things. First of all, I'll go to my CSS file, and I'll add the blur effect, a semantic class that's called filter blur. I use the 12 pixel blur effect. And this class is currently not applied to any element on the page. What I'll do now is I'll go to the page code, the regular Velo code. And I wrote some code, really a simple code, it's just a function that once a user clicks on this button, first of all, I'm showing this box, which is this code in here, subscribe box show. And then to apply the blur effect that I did, I want to apply it to the entire section here, which calls section 7. I want to use a custom class list command and .add and add the blur effect that I just made. So this will add the selected class that we made to all the elements that inside section 7. Everything inside will get this effect. And I did the exact same thing in reverse. So once you click on this button, I remove this blur effect and also hide this section. So we can now see how it works. If I go to the review mode. So I'm in section 7. I have this button, and I have here all kind of elements, text, images, video, whatever you want. And if I click on subscribe, all of the things that were inside that was parented by the section 7 will be blurred. I'm adding a CSS class to specific elements by clicking on a button. So everything here is blurred. The video is still working. So everything inside the editor can get this effect, and also any other effect. And once the user is finished here and click subscribe, we get back to the old version without the CSS class. And this way we can really control when to add or remove classes from elements. And this could lead to a really interactive experience. Okay, so now we'll return to the presentation. So we saw all the CSS capabilities that we can do. Any questions that we have?
Yes, we can get started on some questions. So the first one, we have, how can I use CSS to enhance the mega menus?
Okay, so mega menus work exactly like the rest of the components in Wix. For each component, we defined global classes that you can find on the directionary. We'll give you later a link for it. And every component has a list of divs, of elements inside of it that we allow to tackle using CSS parameters. So you can basically touch everything from the label, the tabs of it, the container, whatever you want. You can just apply CSS for it. You just need to define it well in order to tackle the exact element that you want.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, we have a few more. The next question, would we support future CSS parameters?
Yeah, so we're supporting all the CSS parameters because CSS is like a global language of the entire web and the entire browsers. So each CSS parameter that you can find on the web, we're supporting it. You just need to apply it to the right component that can support it. And you can just, as the parameters will be added, we will support them as well.
Great, good to know. Next question, is the CSS code specific to each page?
So no. So first of all, you have the CSS file that we're providing, the global CSS, is affecting all of the pages of all of the website. That in mind, you can tackle specific elements using the custom classes. So if you have a page that you don't want to change, or you have a specific page that you want to change elements in, you can just use the custom classes in order to tackle the specific components. So it doesn't have to affect all of the elements on the page, but the general, like the basic function is to affect everything.
All right, next question. What CSS parameters are we supporting?
Oh, so basically everything.
And next question, can I use any CSS I find online in Wix?
So yeah, generally, yeah, you can. You just need to take it and to see how on which component you are applying it to. You need to see that the div structure of our component is similar to the div structure of the CSS you copied. Because if you're trying to apply a CSS parameter to a specific part of a component that maybe we don't have, or maybe you took it from a component which is more complex, built more in a more complex way in HTML, sometimes it wouldn't work. So you maybe need to adjust it a bit. But usually, yeah, you can use whatever CSS you find.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, next question. Is there a shortcut for bringing up the CSS file?
Sure, like a keyboard shortcut, not that I'm aware of, but you just can find it under the tabs of the Velo when the code tabs on the left.
All right, next question. So in Wix, you use normal CSS and JS. All the CSS selectors and JS methods are there.
Can you repeat? Tell us.
Yes. So they're asking, so in Wix, you use normal CSS and JS. Yeah. All the CSS selectors and JS methods are there, question
mark. I think the question means how the selectors in Wix work. So we provide global selectors that we define for our components, which might be different from HTML selectors that you find generally on the web. For example, we don't use ID, but we do allow custom classes. So maybe that's the question. So some of the things will work exactly like they work on HTML environment, and some things will need to be adjusted a bit. But generally, we're using classes, global classes and custom classes.
Awesome. And it looks like that is all the questions that we have time for today. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you so much, Daniel, for such a wonderful presentation. If you have any questions that we didn't get around to today, feel free to go to the new Wix Studio forum and join the Wix Studio Discord community. Feel free to ask away there. We have plenty of team members and product managers that are happy to help you out. And they're always in Discord, so you can ask at any time. And of course, our Academy is always there as a resource for you to get more information. This recording of this webinar will be uploaded to our Academy and to our YouTube channel for you to watch at your leisure. And if you have any feedback from today, please let us know in the feedback form, and someone will drop it in the chat soon. And thank you again so much for joining us. And we hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.